I am Noose the Scribe. Welcome back to the Ostracon files. In the infinite ledger of the cosmos, everything is recorded. Every deed is cataloged, every debt, every mistake, and nothing stays buried. Take File 77B, a minor entry from a small, damp planet in the late 20th century. What Geoffery Rook thought was a lost weekend in 1977 has matured into a multi-million credit paternity suit. It is a messy accounting of lavender, logistics, and the wrong sort of visitation. Let us begin the audit.
Cosmic Bureaucracy Blues. Part 1. The Wrong Sort of Visitation. The first sign that Jeff's Tuesday was about to diverge violently from his planned schedule of microwave lasagna and Gardener's World reruns was not a sound, but a shadow. It began as a subtle dimming of the weak Buckinghamshire sun over his modest semi-detached in Bletchley. Jeff, midway through carefully pruning his prize-winning, in the Milton Keynes Horticultural Society's Small Urban Plot category, 2023, lavender, assumed a particularly committed cloud. Then his neighbor, Barry, dropped his hedge trimmer. "Bloody hellfire, Jeff," which for Barry was the equivalent of a scream. Jeff looked up. The shadow wasn't drifting, it was settling. A geometric darkness was spreading across the estate, precise and cold, swallowing gardens, houses, and the distant concrete cows of the city center. It wasn't a cloud. Clouds do not have perfectly hexagonal recessed lighting arrays or faint humming outlines that make your fillings vibrate. A low sub-auditory thrum permeated the air, a frequency that seemed to bypass the ears and rattle the spleen. Jeff's lavender trembled. Up and up his gaze traveled, past the television aerials, past a confused-looking pigeon, into a vast, impossible expanse of gray alloy that filled the sky from horizon to horizon. It was less a ship and more a new, terribly stylish ceiling for Milton Keynes.
Is it one of them Amazon drones gone rogue? Barry asked, his voice thin. Before Jeff could formulate a reply that encompassed the sheer scale of the logistical nightmare that would be delivering a package via a vessel the size of Greater London, a hatch, a neat rectangular seam that hissed with blue light, opened in the underbelly directly above his house. Not above the city centre, not above the football stadium, above number 42 Lavender Walk. A beam of coherent light, the colour of a migraine aura, lanced down and enveloped Jeff's front garden. It was cool, odourless, and hummed with a bureaucratic finality. When it retracted, two figures stood on his carefully tended lawn, crushing the alpines. The first was a nightmare of popular imagination, 8 feet tall, chitinous, with too many jointed limbs and a face that looked like a cuttlefish's bad dream. It held a shimmering device that was probably a weapon or a very aggressive scanner. Jeff's bowels performed a brief, sympathetic clench.
The second figure was the real shock. She was humanoid, sleek, and dressed in a form-fitting suit that glowed with a soft, internal cerulean light, managing to look both profoundly alien and like she'd just stepped out of a futurist corporate conference. Her hair was a cascade of silver filaments held in a severe bun. She carried a sleek data slate and a physical folder of intimidating thickness, bound in what appeared to be vibrating crystal. Her expression was one of profound, galaxy-weary annoyance. She ignored Barry's slack-jawed stare and the now distant wail of sirens. Her multifaceted eyes, glowing with mild amber light, locked onto Jeff. She consulted her slate. Designation: Geoffery Alistair Rook, Terran, Sol 3, male, chronological standard equivalent 42 cycles. Her voice was crisp, translated with perfect RP English diction, but with an underlying buzz, like a wasp in a suit. Yes? Can I help you? Jeff managed, secateurs still in hand.
The professional part of his brain, the part that managed logistics for a paperclip wholesaler, noted the crushing of his Saxraphaga white pixie with detached horror. "You have been served," she stated, not a question. She extended the crystal folder. As Jeff numbly took it, it felt both light and impossibly heavy. The front was labeled in shimmering glyphs that resolved after a dizzying second into legible text. Interstellar Family Support and Paternity Enforcement Unit. Case ZY77 Alpha 4492K. Subject Geoffery A. Rook. Claimant Zainara of the Vilath Progenitor Collective. Matter accumulated filial remittances. Standard cycle 10,224 through 10,228. Status delinquent. Interest accruing. Jeff blinked. The words made sense individually. Collectively, they were nonsense. "I'm sorry, there must be a mistake. Filial remittances? I don't have any children. Not on Earth, certainly."
The alien bureaucrat, Zainara, sighed. It was a sound that conveyed the weight of millennia of dealing with deadbeat dads across the spiral arm. Denial is a common initial response. Standard Procedure 7B dictates a confirmatory scan. She nodded to the chitinous guard. It raised its device. A thin pink beam shot out and played over Jeff from head to toe. It tickled. The device emitted a series of rapid, cheerful pings, and a holographic display above it lit up like a fruit machine hitting the jackpot. Strands of glowing DNA double helices spun, matched, and flashed with triumphant golden light. A large, pulsing glyph that even Jeff could translate appeared. Paternal match, confirmed, 99.9987% certainty. Jeff felt the world tilt. "No, that's impossible. I've never left the country, let alone the planet. I have a photo of me at Center Parks in 2019 to prove it." Zainara's lips, a thin, iridescent line, tightened. Physical proximity is not a prerequisite for gamete contribution under the Vilath Reciprocal Biological Sampling Treaty of Cycle 9450. Your planetary authorities signed the accords in 1977 during a lost weekend in Geneva. Appendix C, Clause 44, unattended samples and implied consent. A cold dread began to seep through Jeff's confusion. A sample? What sample?
"A standard terrestrial biological survey. Buccal swab taken from you during your nocturnal repose on the date you designate June 14th, 2008. The operative was reprimanded for excessive enthusiasm. The sample was logged, catalogued, and subjected to full-spectrum genomic analysis on the research vessel Inquisitive Calm." Jeff had a vague, beer-fogged memory of a university field trip to a meteor shower. He'd woken up with a canker sore. He'd blamed cheap lager. "Analysis," Zainara continued, her voice dipping into a register of personal, embittered grievance, which was concluded. The report was filed. The sample was due for incineration. However, a junior lab technician, a romantic fool, decided human DNA was charmingly robust and left it in a nutrient-rich gel to see what would happen in a cytogenesis chamber, which was, due to a separate clerical error, still set to active synthesis for 5 standard cycles. She closed her eyes as if pained. Post-analysis conception is a clear violation of Cosmic HR Policy 889, separation of study and progeny. The entire lab team was fired. My team. I was the senior genomic assessor. My pension, my tenure on the Ring of Law, gone because of an unattended swab and a sentimental intern.
The absurdity of it all crashed over Jeff. He was being held financially responsible for a cosmic lab accident.
So, you're not even the mother? Zainara drew herself up, her glowing suit brightening with indignation. I am the designated claimant. The progeny, designated unit ZY77 Alpha 4492K Kevin, requires sustenance, enrichment, and a university fund. The responsibility falls to the source genome. That is you. The debt, with applicable late fees and compounded interest across 4 galactic standard cycles. She tapped her slate. A number appeared in the air. It was long. It contained symbols Jeff didn't recognize. The Earth currency conversion ticker beside it finally settled on a figure. It was enough to buy, outright, several small moons. You have 10 standard Terran diurnal cycles to remit payment in stellar credits, Zainara stated. Failure to comply will result in asset seizure, beginning with this domicile and its, she glanced at the crushed alpines with disdain, organic decorative substrates. With that, she turned. The migraine beam descended again. In a flash, she and her silent, chitinous colleague were gone. The colossal ship above gave one final gut-shaking hum and shot into the upper atmosphere with a silence that was somehow louder than its arrival, leaving behind only a perfect, geometric circle of clear blue sky and the smell of ozone and crushed dreams. Jeff stood on his lawn holding the crystal folder. Barry finally found his voice. "Jeff, mate," he said, pale as milk. "What did you do?" Jeff looked at the folder, then at the sky, then at his ruined flower bed. The professional part of his brain, the logistics coordinator, finally short-circuited. "Barry," he said, his voice eerily calm, "I think I'm going to need a solicitor." Part 2. Media frenzy and multi-species mooching. The quiet of Lavender Walk was a memory. Jeff's semi-detached was now the epicenter of a planetary spectacle, a perfect storm of human absurdity meeting cosmic red tape. The first to arrive, even before the last echoes of the mothership's departure had faded, were the YouTubers. They came on electric scooters and in vans plastered with logos, pointing selfie sticks and ring lights at Jeff's crushed alpines as if they were sacred ground. "What's up, alien baby daddy army?" one shouted directly into his lens, just as Jeff opened his front door to put the bins out. He closed it again, bin bags still in hand. Then came the news vans, satellite dishes unfolded like mechanical blooms. Reporters in 2 crisp jackets stood in front of his hedge, speaking in hushed, dramatic tones about first contact of the familial kind and the man who fathered the stars. A drone buzzed overhead, its camera whirring as it tried to peek into his bathroom window. Jeff drew the curtain, the one with the little embroidered badgers. His solicitor, Derek from Derek & Sons Family Law and Conveyancing, had arrived pale and sweating, clutching a briefcase and a copy of Extraterrestrial Civil Proceedings, a primer, draft. He'd printed off the government's hastily updated preparedness website. He'd taken one look at the crystal folder, its contents now projected as a shimmering, incomprehensible ledger above Jeff's coffee table, and promptly asked for a very strong tea. The principle of pacta sunt servanda is clear, Derek quavered, stirring 3 sugars into his mug. Agreements must be kept. The 1977 Geneva Accords, well, the annexes were always a bit dodgy. Smuggled in after the brandy, my old tutor said. But they're on the books, and this DNA match, it's irrefutable. "It's a lab accident," Jeff protested for the 100th time. "You can't charge child support for a petri dish progeny." "The folder designates Kevin as a sentient dependent, Jeff. It has a suggested curriculum and a list of preferred neutron star-grade educational toys." Derek scrolled through the hologram, wincing. "The late fees alone, they've compounded interest across solar winds. Do you have any idea what the VIG is on a solar wind?" Before Jeff could answer, the doorbell chimed, a new insistent electronic warble installed by the PanicBot home security system. On the monitor,
instead of a reporter, stood a creature that looked like a bipedal, anxious prawn wearing a little vest. It held a datapad. Jeff opened the door a crack. Yes? The prawn being's mouthparts clacked. A synthesized voice emanated from its vest. Greetings, biological contributor Rook. I am Glix of the Frondian Drift. I wish to submit Form Z88B, application for provisional kinship-based residency and associated subsidies. Your stellar credit line appears robust. It proffered the pad, which showed a form with complex diagrams of what might have been digestive tracts or family trees. I'm sorry, what? Secondary claimants to filial remittance streams are entitled to supplemental caregiving stipends under Interstellar Reciprocal Aid Statute 45. I am a very good uncle figure. The prawn gestured with a claw. I have references from a gas giant. Jeff slowly closed the door. He turned to Derek. What was that?
Derek was frantically scrolling on his phone. Oh dear. Oh no. It's on the Interstellar Social Services portal. Your case file is public record on the Galactic Net. It seems you've been flagged as a high-value obligor. They think Earth's social welfare system is now open for business. It was a floodgate opened by cosmic stupidity. Over the next 48 hours, Jeff's garden and the entire street became a queue for the universe's most opportunistic relatives. A gelatinous being in a floating orb applied for a nurturing sphere grant. A trio of chirping insectoids in matching tiny helmets filed a joint petition for cross-species mentorship visas. A dignified 7-foot-tall entity with crystalline skin and the demeanor of a disappointed librarian presented a claim for academic guardianship fees, stating it was, by a complex Vilath genealogical algorithm, Kevin's third cousin, twice phased. The British government, in the form of a permanently flustered junior minister named Nigel, set up a temporary extraterrestrial benefits office in a porta-cabin on Jeff's driveway. It was sheer chaos. Nigel, armed with a whistle and a copy of the UK Benefits Handbook, tried to explain the 2-child limit to a silicon-based life form who communicated via tectonic plate vibrations. No, you see, you have to have lived here for the past 3... Oh, bother.
The media, of course, was in ecstasy. Jeff was catapulted from obscure logistics manager to global tabloid icon. The headlines wrote themselves. Space Cad Dad, my out-of-this-world maintenance battle. The Sun. Who's the daddy? A galactic court will decide. The Guardian. Alien baby mum, he won't return my subspace calls. Daily Mail. He was offered a 6-figure sum to appear on Strictly Come Dancing, the Astro Tango. A daytime talk show, This Morning, hosted a debate, Alien Paternity, Right or Rite of Passage, with a panel consisting of a philosopher, a vicar, and a very confused ufologist. A pop song called Phone Home, the Child Support's Due, charted at number 42. Through it all, Zainara was a glacial, distant figure. Her communications came via formal crystalline missives that materialized with a pop in Jeff's living room, updating him on interest accruals or rejecting his appeals with citations like see Vyloth Collective versus the nebular entity of Xylos, cycle 8002.
Jeff, driven to the edge of sanity by prawn uncles and paparazzi, decided on a gambit of desperate human normalcy. The day of the preliminary interspecies tribunal, convened in a hastily rented conference room at the Heathrow Hilton, the only venue with sufficient parking for shuttlecraft, he stopped at a garage forecourt. He bought a cellophane-wrapped bouquet of carnations and lilies, the kind that always smelled vaguely of regret and petrol station air freshener. It was a gesture, a peace offering, a profoundly, stupidly human thing to do. The tribunal was bedlam. The room was packed with journalists, prawn beings, vibrating crystals, and a large section of the Vilath Progenitor Collective's legal team, who resembled annoyed bioluminescent stags. Nigel was there, clutching a Union Jack folder.
Derek was hyperventilating into a paper bag. Judge Horatio P. Slant, a surprisingly ancient and unflappable human judge recalled from retirement for his experience with unusual domestic cases, presided, banging a gavel on a block of neutral asteroid rock. Zinara arrived last. She did not slink in. She processed. Her glowing pantsuit was a deeper, more authoritative cobalt. She was followed by 2 new aides carrying stacks of shimmering folders. She took her place at the claimant's table, her expression one of sublime, detached efficiency.
Jeff, heart hammering, stood as she approached her seat. He thrust the bouquet towards her. The petrol station flowers clashed horribly with her ethereal glow. "Miss Zinara," he stammered, the room dead silent but for the whir of cameras. "I just wanted to say, this is all a terrible misunderstanding, and, well, no hard feelings?" For a fraction of a second, her multifaceted eyes regarded the flowers. They flickered, not with sentiment, but with what looked like profound taxonomic confusion, as if he'd just offered her a handful of raw sewage. Then her gaze hardened into legal diamond. She ignored the bouquet entirely. Instead, she nodded to one of her aides, who stepped forward and slapped a new document onto the table before Judge Slant. This one was blood red and pulsed ominously. "Your Honor," Zinara said, her voice cutting through the room like a plasma torch, "in light of the respondent's evident inability to comprehend the gravity of his fiscal obligations and his continued residence in a jurisdiction with primitive enforcement mechanisms, the Valath Collective petitions for immediate extradition under the Interstellar Debtors Fugitive Act." She finally looked at Jeff, and for the first time, he saw not annoyance, but the cold, calculated ambition of a mid-level bureaucrat whose career had been torpedoed by a wayward swab, and who now saw a path to reinstatement through him. "We believe," she said, the ghost of a smile touching her iridescent lips, "his skill set could be put to more productive use in a controlled environment, far, far from here." The gavel banged. The cameras exploded in light. Jeff stood frozen, the cheap flowers wilting in his hand, realizing with a stomach-dropping lurch that he was no longer fighting for his savings. He was fighting for his freedom, and he was losing. Part 3. Sentenced to be helpful. The Heathrow Hilton conference room, smelling of ozone, alien musk, and human panic, held its breath. The pulsing red extradition document glowed like a fresh wound on the asteroid rock bench. Judge Horatio P. Slant peered at it over his half-moon spectacles, his face a relief map of legal wrinkles. He had seen many things in his time: custody battles over prized whippets, disputes about who owned the light in a shared hallway, but this was novel. He found he rather liked novel. It staved off the boredom of retirement. "Extradition," he mused, his voice a dry rustle of parchment. "On what grounds, Madam Zinara?" "Persistent and willful delinquency of a federally recognized quantum debt," she stated, her cerulean suit glowing with purpose. "Coupled with demonstrated frivolity in the face of interstellar jurisprudence." Her multifaceted gaze flicked to the now drooping petrol station bouquet Jeff still clutched, as if it were Exhibit A in the case for his galactic incompetence. Derek, Jeff's solicitor, shot up like a jack-in-the-box, his paper bag forgotten. "Objection, Your Honor. My client's gesture is a culturally appropriate signal of goodwill under the Terran Customs Act of whenever." "It is a delaying tactic," Zinara countered smoothly. "The respondent's planet lacks the infrastructure to garnish wages paid in stellar credits. His physical presence is the only asset of negotiable value. The Valath Collective proposes a labor for equity scheme." Jeff's mouth was desert dry. "Labor?" Judge Slant steepled his fingers. "What manner of labor?" Zinara tapped her data slate.
A hologram shimmered into being above the bench. It showed a sleek, sterile facility that looked like a cross between a university campus and a high-security clinic. The Vylath Progenitor Collective maintains several genomic outreach and harmonization centers. There is a chronic shortage of relatable teaching aids, beings who can provide practical, ground-level perspective on the hazards of careless gamete donation. She turned that diamond-hard gaze back on Jeff. The respondent would be ideally suited for a role in, let's call it, reproductive responsibility education, a community service placement. He would work off his debt through public outreach, serving as a living cautionary tale.
A living cautionary tale in space. The media pack erupted. Flashbulbs popped. Nigel, the junior minister, whispered frantically into a headset, "No, Prime Minister, I don't think Brexit means Brexit applies here." Judge Slant banged his gavel. Thunk. Order. He looked at Jeff. "Mr. Rook, you are, by your own admission and irrefutable genetic evidence, the biological progenitor of dependent unit Kevin. You acknowledge the debt." "It was a swab," Jeff cried, his voice cracking. "An unattended swab. I didn't do anything." "Legally, you provided the sample," Slant intoned. "The lost weekend of Geneva Accords are regrettably clear on implied consent for research. The subsequent creative use of said sample is a separate HR issue for the Violeth." He shot a look at Zanara, who stiffened. "But the chain of custody and thus liability begins with you." He leaned back, the wheels of an ancient, quirky legal mind turning. A simple judgment for the claimant would see Jeff's terrestrial assets seized, which were worthless to Zanara, and leave the debt unpaid. Extradition was a messy intergalactic incident, but community service, that had a certain elegant British symmetry to it. It was punitive, productive, and got the problem off his docket and out of his atmosphere. "The court," Judge Slant announced, the room hushing, "finds in favor of the claimant on the matter of liability." Jeff's knees buckled. Derek caught his elbow. "However," Slant continued, "the proposed remedy of extradition and indefinite debt servitude is excessive. This is, at its core, a family matter, albeit an unconventionally conceived one." He paused, letting the pun hang in the air. A few of the more linguistically gifted alien reporters chittered appreciatively. "Therefore, the court orders the following. Geoffrey Alastair Rook shall satisfy his debt through a period of mandated community service, to be served at a Vylath Genomic Harmonization Center of the claimant's choosing. The term of service shall be proportional to the debt, recalculated at a standard galactic intern wage minus room and board." He peered at Zanara. "Which I trust will be adequate. The objective of this service will be educational outreach, as suggested. No hazardous labor. And he gets weekend visitors, subject to security clearance." It was a masterpiece. Jeff was condemned, but as a teacher, not a slave. The debt would be paid, Zanara got her win and her useful idiot, and the British legal system looked reasonable and inventive on a galactic stage. Nigel beamed, already drafting the press release about British fair play triumphing among the stars. Jeff just felt numb. How long? Zanara consulted her slate, tapping rapidly. The numbers strolled. "At a standard intern rate of 3.5 stellar credits per cycle, with a recalculation of late fees to a simple interest model as a gesture of judicial goodwill." She looked almost disappointed at the lower number. "Roughly equivalent to 117 of your Terran years." A gasp went through the room. Jeff saw his remaining life and several lifetimes after evaporate. "But," Judge Slant interjected, raising a finger, "given the unique and precedent-setting nature of this case and the court's desire for rehabilitation over interminable servitude, the sentence shall be capped."
He smiled a thin old man smile. To a term of 5 Earth years. The remaining debt is hereby converted to a lifetime galactic child support order, payable at a rate of £1 per month, to be reviewed upon Kevin's maturity or graduation from tertiary education, whichever comes later.
It was absurd. It was brilliant. It was the most British sentence imaginable, a devastatingly long theoretical debt reduced to a manageable but eternally annoying practical burden. A £5 a month for the rest of his life. Jeff would be paying for Kevin's university until he, Jeff, was in a nursing home arguing with the carer about the direct debit. Zinara's glowing suit flickered with what might have been frustration, then settled into acceptance. A 5-year, fully funded educational aid was still a win. A monthly sterling payment was a bureaucratic nuisance, but it established the principle, the precedent. She nodded curtly. The Vyloth Collective accepts the court's creative sentencing. And so it was done. The farewell was not dramatic. The mothership did not return. A smaller, utilitarian shuttle, resembling a floating filing cabinet, collected Jeff from a designated orbital affairs zone near Luton Airport. His neighbors gathered. Barry gave him a firm handshake and a multi-pack of custard creams for the journey. Derek handed him a folder of useless human legal precedents.
Jeff stood with a single suitcase, containing pants, socks, his Gardener's World compendium, and a photo of his late mum. He was no longer the space cadet dad. He was now a civil servant of the cosmos. The inside of the Vylath Genomic Harmonization Center on Outpost Theta 7 was exactly as sterile as the hologram promised. His quarters were a comfortable cell-like room. His job was simple. He was a living exhibit in the Terran Gamete Donor Hazards and Outcomes Wing. Each day, he would sit at a bland desk in a clean classroom while groups of young Vylath progenitors in training, their sleek forms humming with attentive energy, filed in. Zinara, now his supervisor, a fact that filled them both with mutual, unspoken dread, would give a lecture. And this, she would say, gesturing to Jeff with the tip of a light pen, is a Class 3 biological contributor. Note the limited bioluminescence, the inefficient bipedal stance. Observe how a moment of terrestrial negligence, a failure to secure a genetic sample, can lead to multi-cycle fiscal and custodial entanglement. Jeff would then be required to stand and answer questions. Did you feel no spiritual connection to your stray nucleotides? One trainee would ask. Do you regret the recreational use of fermented grains that led to your impaired vigilance during the swab event? Can you demonstrate the shrugging gesture you used when first presented with the paternity claim? It was humiliating. It was surreal. He was a zoo animal for bureaucrats. Yet, in the quiet moments, a strange peace settled. The air was always a perfect temperature. The food pellets were nutritiously bland. The constant, low-grade anxiety of Earth, mortgages, traffic, office politics, was gone, replaced by the sharp, clear anxiety of being a pedagogical tool. It was, in a way, simpler. He never met Kevin. He saw hollows, a shimmering, amorphous blob of potentiality in a nurturing nutrient tank, slowly being guided into a chosen form. It looked like a very expensive, sentient jelly.
Jeff felt no paternal pull, only a distant, bureaucratic connection, like being related to a very complicated tax form. He did his 5 years. He told his story 10,000 times. He became oddly proficient in Vylath Administrative Code, Subchapter G, Filial Remittances. On the day of his release, Zinara met him at the shuttle bay. Her suit was a less confrontational shade of teal. She handed him a data slate. Your sentence is complete. The monthly sterling obligation remains. Do not be late. The Vylath Treasury has automated collection. Will I see you again? Jeff asked, for lack of anything else to say. Only if you default.
she said, and for the first time, he thought he saw a flicker in her amber eyes that wasn't annoyance. It was the shared, weary understanding of two beings who had been permanently, absurdly linked by a paperwork snafu of universal proportions. Now go. Your planet's vegetation requires pruning. The shuttle returned him to a field outside Milton Keynes. The world had moved on. There was a new viral sensation, a new political crisis. He was a footnote. He returned to number 42, Lavender Walk. Barry was older. The Alpines had grown back. Life resumed. Every month, on the 14th, a statement arrives. Not a crystal folder, but a plain email from an untraceable server. Violath Collective Treasury, sterling remittance due £1. Late fee, 10,000 stellar credits. Jeff pays it. He logs on, transfers the pound. Sometimes he wonders what form Kevin chose. Sometimes, in the quiet of his garden, he looks up at the stars, not with wonder, but with the mild irritation of a man forever linked to a direct debit from the cosmos. He is free, but he is also forever on the hook. The bureaucracy, it turned out, was eternal, and it had his number. The end.